If you're a Christian, then you've inherited all the good stuff from the gospel that we love, the liberation, the love, the freedom, the grace, the fact that we get to be who we are, all those groovy, wonderful things we love about Jesus, the transformative power of Christ, right? You get to keep all that, but you don't get to get rid of all the shit. The defending slavery, the oppression of women for thousands of years, the oppression of queer folks, the oppression of our Jewish siblings. I mean, you don't get to just say, I don't want any parts of that.
Hi, beautiful people. Today I am bringing you a conversation with myself and Reverend Lenny Duncan. He is a mission developer, pastor at Messiah Lutheran Church, Vancouver, Washington, and the author of Dear Church, a love letter from a Black preacher to the whitest denomination in the U.S. I know you also have another book coming this summer called United States of Grace. But I'm so honored to talk to you because I've been doing more and more of my research on you leading up to this conversation. And you have been talking about the issues that are on the forefront of our minds right this second for years. I watched a YouTube video of yours from like 2016 that could have been shot yesterday.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for allowing me to talk to your community during a really important time for Black lives in this country. And yeah, I mean, it's hard not to talk about this, right? I mean, we're living the same summer every 4 to 6 years in America now. And it's the same cycle. A community is oppressed to the point that something becomes a flashpoint, and it could be economic oppression, it could be some of the legal systems, it could be some of the political systems. It doesn't matter what it is, right? I mean, in Ferguson, you know, after the investigation, what they discovered was that I think it was something like 60 or 70% of the city's budget was from citations.
Wow.
So this police force had been spending most of its time creating the entire city budget off of citations. So exploiting the city budget off of poor Black and brown people in the area. So when Michael Brown dies, after years of this harassment, I mean, people were tens of thousands of dollars in debt because they were taking payday loans to pay off fines so they could keep their, you know, driver's license so they could drive to work. And it was this never-ending cycle. I mean, people were fed up in Ferguson. Mm-hmm. And when Darren Wilson, who has done less time in jail than most protesters I know, was released and nothing happened to him, that city exploded. And it's the same thing on Lake Street right now in the Twin Cities. There is years and years of systemic issues. It's not just that one of us died again. It's everything that leads up to it, and then that moment becomes a flashpoint. And then we forget, and it starts over again. The church abdicates its responsibility. White folks go back to what they were doing. That's it. And then another one of my cousins, or, you know, just today on my Twitter feed, if you look right now, my little brother, Daniel Duncan, was assaulted at St. Agnes Hospital in Fresno, California, by the security there and held for 4 hours in the basement after being tased 12 times and beaten because he was bringing his wife to receive mental health treatment. Now, I really want your listeners to think about this for a second, okay? It's the middle of a global pandemic. There's been nothing but Black trauma on TV. They both lost their jobs. They're struggling to make it financially. She has a mental health crisis and goes to the helpers, right? Isn't that what Mr. Rogers told me when I thought white people were safe? Go to the helpers. So they go to the helpers. They go to the people who are supposed to help them in the community. Instead, what happens is, as she's having a mental health issue or flare up with some of her chronic stuff and some of the work that she's been doing around her illness, all this stuff has just caused some of her symptoms to come out again. And how this hospital responds, this Catholic hospital grounded in Christian ideals, how they respond is they beat her husband in front of her. Right? And so this is what we mean when we say Black Lives Matter. What we're saying is it's not just the police, it's the entire thing, because here's this person doing all the things they're supposed to be doing. They're social distancing. They're, you know, I mean, they're doing everything, and like they're having this mental health crisis, and the paramedics have to come. And then my brother comes home and realizes that, you know, there's paramedics there, and he rushes to the hospital to find out what's going on with his wife. He hears her screaming, right? And he reacts. And instead, you know, any of us would react like that if that was our partner.
Absolutely.
You know, so I mean, and this is, you know, I mean, this is Tuesday we're talking. I don't know when you're going to post this, but I'm afraid to see what Wednesday is going to bring.
Yeah.
So sorry for that rant. I've had a little bit of coffee, and I've been handling media from Fresno, California since 8 this morning. So.
Yeah. Please, no apologies are in line whatsoever. I know I've only got like 45 minutes of your time, and I want to, if possible, get as deep of an education on this as we can. And
yeah,
I thank you so much for lending your voice to the community. I have a very diverse community, LGBTQ, all different races, and I know they're all waiting to hear what we have to say. And for me, I just want to platform your voice so badly because of your knowledge on this. And you've also led so many lives. I'm reading your book. It says high school dropout, drug dealer, sex worker, street corner poet, hitchhiker, dharma bum, small town drifter, seminarian, political activist, father, pastor, lover, public theologian, and writer. So all of those experiences to me give you such a broad and diverse understanding of the world and all of these broken systems that you must be privy to.
Yeah, I'm writing about that in United States of Grace. It's my memoir. You know, that pre-orders will be up in like a month. I don't know. I mean, it just feels like an icky time to talk about a new book, but I talk about my story. And yeah, the way I grew up, and I just happen to have one of those very uniquely American stories. I mean, the whole premise of the new book is that setting aside our system, setting aside our political leaders, and setting aside the institutions that continue to oppress people in this country, setting all that aside, what America is this conversation we're having. It's you and me. It's you and this community. It's all of us hearing the suffering and the cry in the world, right, and responding to it. That's the America I know, right? And I feel like people need to hear that, right? Like that happens still in this country, you know, and it doesn't come from our leaders a lot, and it doesn't come from the church a lot, which is the biggest heartbreak. But, you know, I mean, being a queer black man and living in this country, being homeless, having encountered the prison industrial complex, it gives me a different power analysis than other clergy. Because they're talking about it from theory. But like, you know, I spent over almost a year in solitary and juvenile. Like you spend a year by yourself isolated and watch your mind melt in front of you. And then your personality comes out of that room, you know, yeah. I mean, you know, this is, you know, it just gives me a different power analysis. But, you know, in Dear Church, I believe that the call of the Christian church in the 21st century, the whole premise of the book is to dismantle white supremacy, that Christians have no other call right now. And you may say, Lenny, what about the environment? Lenny, what about queer phobia? Lenny, what about transphobia? Lenny, what about economic empowerment? How do we dismantle capitalism? And what I talk about in the book is that white supremacy is, you have to think of it as demonic. I mean, you have to think about it as otherworldly. You know what I mean? Like infused, intelligent, malevolent evil that constantly shifts and change. And that's what systemic evil and systemic racism looks like, I think, from a scriptural standpoint. But my point is, white supremacy is the grandfather demon. And if we exorcise that demon, then the demons of patriarchy, the demons of heterosexism, the demons of capitalism, the demons of all these other things, they're all going to be cast away too. And we have to throw ourselves behind this mission, not because I think white people care. The premise of the book is that there will be no Christian witness in the 21st century if we don't do this work within 50 years. And one thing that white Protestants are obsessed with is legacy. I mean, the Episcopalians, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter they're all obsessed with legacy, right? There will be no Christian witness if Black lives don't matter in this country. And if you think that's not important, if you think Christianity will go on, North American Christianity and North American theology is the most exported theology around the world. It is behind some of the most heinous things that still happen through neocolonialism. And if we don't get it right here, other people around the world are affected by it. And I don't think there will be a thing like Christianity in 50 years if we don't throw ourselves fully into this work.
How do we begin ceasing to conflate Christianity with patriotism and capitalism? Because I was raised in a church that I somehow felt like I wasn't allowed to say that capitalism isn't working, that white supremacy is a problem, that patriotism does not equate to Jesus' messages. How do we get people to understand and not feel attacked? How do we invite people into the conversation that are having such a difficult time removing these concepts from the church?
I think the first thing that we have to understand is that, you know, in a lot of ways, the progressive church movement's been waiting for a lot of our elders to join the church triumphant, which is a polite way for pastors to say we've been waiting for a lot of people who've been in the way to die. I mean, that's just the truth. I mean, there was just a generation that was entrenched in this idea, and a lot of them came back from World War II with these ideas, and the world had an existential crisis and thought that they had defeated fascism. Clearly, fascism is still alive and well in this world and the concepts of it. It's hard to kill an idea with bombs. But you know, they came back with these ideas. I mean, even if you just, you know, I talk a lot about in the book about representations of Christ, right? You see, I have mostly black representations of Christ behind me, or, you know, empowering ones of the Virgin Mary, you know, that talk about. I mean, so what I'm talking about is like those symbols we get, right? Like, so if you look at the average Protestant church, they have that white doobie brother Jesus, you know, for the ass, seek, knock, you know what I mean, picture, right? Well, the reason that became so popular was because in World War II, the USO gave all the guys who were shipping over a card, and some Lutheran guy painted a picture of Jesus that looked like him, like a skinny Norwegian white dude, right? But a lot of those guys came back from World War II and credited the fact that they didn't get their heads blown off with that little USO card with the Lord's Prayer on it tucked in their helmet, right? So what do? They come back traumatized from war. They think they've defeated evil. They, you know, start putting American flags in the sanctuary, and they start painting pictures of this doobie brother Jesus the USO gave them once. And suddenly it's everywhere. That seems innocuous, but if I live in a world that tells me that white people are not on my side, or that whiteness is out to get me, or that every white person I encounter seems to not have my best interests at heart, and then every image I see of God is of a white Jesus, well, then I start to believe that that God is not for me. How can I believe that a God who looks like the police, the teachers, the firemen, and everyone else who treat me like I'm subhuman is suddenly for me? And those messages get instilled in children in a very young age. It's the same reason why we want to see representations of femme or female, or female identifying, or women scientists as much as we can in media, or artists or leaders. It's the same kind of theory that white feminism seems to be able to grasp around women, but can't seem to grasp around the importance, particularly in theological circles, of rich, diverse representations of Christ. I mean, these are the earliest images. If I tell a little white boy that God is white, and then I see black people acting out, there are implicit messages that are deep down in me. So, I mean, that's just, you know, I don't know. That's just one thing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm ranting.
No, you're not. There's so much to unpack. I wish we could speak for 7 hours, because that would skim the surface of what we need to discuss. Another thing I'm so curious about, well, first of all, you're talking about Mr. Rogers and, you know, us having this idea that we're supposed to be trusting these figures. But in reality, that has been a lie for Black people. You can't safely go to a cop for anything. I have to tell you, I am so furious and just banging my head against a wall, talking to Christians that have an answer for everything. I say Black Lives Matter, you say all lives matter, or blue lives matter. I say, you know, look at the Jesus that's white. How did he turn white? You say, oh, because God is white. Like, I've heard the stupidest arguments, and people are just clinging to this. Is it because we've been safe with white beliefs and we don't want to dismantle the system because it works for us?
I don't know. You know, the working kind of praxis that I use is that most white people aren't actively racist. That white supremacy is a system that people sort of benefit from either consciously or unconsciously, and they usually don't have a reason to examine it or engage it. Unless someone brings it to their attention. Let's say they have a loved one who's a person of color, and or they get involved in maybe a church group and or an organizing group that brings this stuff to their attention. And so white supremacy doesn't need active racists to function anymore. It doesn't need the Klan. It doesn't need the Proud Boys. It doesn't need skinheads. It is baked into the very system of what America is. So in that sense, in that sense, people aren't in my mind malicious. Now, have I met active racists? Are they out there? Yes. You know what I mean? But for the most part, most Christians I meet are like that. That's the first thing. I think the first thing is that most people who are truly fighting for liberation know that I'm fighting for my oppressor's freedom, even if they don't know it. And even if they scream and fight and scratch and try and kill me at the end like a cornered animal, that I'm freeing them. They just can't see the bars to their cage as clearly as I can see mine. So using that as a praxis for liberation theology is what it's popularly called. Using that as my praxis, well, then it keeps me from getting too bitter. It keeps me from getting too angry. It keeps me from dehumanizing you in my eyes, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a good thing. I think the other thing, if like you just turned on this YouTube video and you're like, what the fuck is this pastor talking about? Well, then I would just say to you that like everyone gets to start where they get to start, and whatever your journey is, that's your journey, right? I'm not going to take that from you. I take umbrage with you when you realize that there is a journey to take and you refuse to take it. So how do you break through that stuff in the Christian church? I think it has to be a real holistic effort. I mean, if you're going to do that sort of thing, you either have to start from scratch or you have to have some people who are really willing to leverage the stuff in the church. But the big thing is like, it's got to be it's got to be part of your worship. It's got to be part of the songs you pick. It's got to be part of the liturgies you put together. It's got to be about all the language you talk about. It's got to be the way you celebrate the great Thanksgiving at the table for the Eucharist. I mean, all of it has to be a united message, including your preaching, your teaching, as well as other things. Living an anti-racist lifestyle can start out with small things, right? But a church has to be committed to being that space. I can tell you that Black Lives Matter as an organization, in my experience, and most real organizers who are into Black liberation want nothing to do with the church. And it doesn't matter if it's the white church or the black church. The church in itself has failed the greatest social movement of the 21st century consistently. And most likely because it was started by 3 queer Black women, right? But that's just the truth, right? So what the church can do is move alongside some of these movements. You know, there's a little church right next door to the police station on Lake Street. It's a little Lutheran church. I'm going to look up the name of it while I'm talking. I'm not ignoring you. But they're right next door to the police station that was burned down. And what they did was they whether they liked it or not, they became chaplains to the revolution. And so they went out there with water. They went out there with prayer. They went out there with food. They went out there with medical medical supplies. They connected people. They made sure that there was a lost and found at their church, as well as a bulletin board for people to figure out where other people were. And they became a space that was known for being this little bit of the kingdom of God, a block away from where the entire country is watching everything burn. Right? So those are the places that the church can really kind of fit in. But to get to that place, I know those two pastors. Their names are Ingrid and Angela, and they're incredible Lutheran pastors, right? But they've been doing work for 2-3 years to get that community ready to react to that moment. And so you have to put in the law. There are no shortcuts to this. This is a lifestyle. This is, if you want to dismantle white supremacy, it's going to be a lifetime journey. And you know, you get to start where you get to start. If this is the first thing that woke up your spirit, welcome to the table.
Yeah.
And we're trying to make sure there's a seat for everyone.
Yeah. I think you know Jo Lumen. She's doing a lot of work about decolonizing faith. I interviewed her and she stunned me because she made me realize that I was singing a song about slavery and how God freed me as a 12-year-old white girl, you know, middle class outside of Philly. And she was like, that song is about slaves. And my head almost exploded because, and those are the ways that we've been complicit by taking these hymns and making them ours and colonizing and telling people that our faith is superior to everything else. And I just wanted to ask you, because in your book, you were talking about how you worded it and said something like, I'm under the same sentence as a Dylan Roof, which sounds like, you know, yeah, can you explain, like, why stay in the church? Why do this work within the church, within the faith, when it's been so contentious and it is rot?
Yeah, there's a couple things around that. I think the first thing in the chapter's called Dylan Roof is a Lutheran and So Am I. And if you don't know who Dylan Roof is, he's a young man that walked into Mother Emanuel AME Church and killed 9 people a few years ago in the middle of the
walked
Bible
out
study.
alive.
Yeah, and walked out alive. The cops took him to McDonald's on the way to the station, actually, which was like one of the most egregious things I think that happened throughout that whole thing. White supremacists, fully converted online, had made this plan, had picked that location because the terror it would put in the black community, knew that the Bible study was open, sat there 20 minutes while they preached and teached to him and welcomed him in, and then stood up and killed everyone. He was an ELCA Lutheran. I am, which is the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. I am a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, called and ordained through apostolic succession and all those other fancy white terms. I'm not sure what they mean. So, right, like, I'm in the same church body as this young man. And so Dylan Roof is a Lutheran, and so am I. I'm under the same sentence as him. If I don't do the work to change the church, then my actions are no different than Dylan's. And I also wanted to humanize Dylan in the story. I didn't want, you know, it's easy to say Dylan was especially in Lutheran circles, what was that? Dylan was made into a monster, right? Dylan was made into a boogeyman. But yet, you know, my argument is that Dylan could be sitting in your confirmation class right now. Yeah. And I actually spent a lot of time on the book tour saying that exact line. Dylan could be in your confirmation class right now. And Dylan's confirmation teacher approached me after one of those talks and how she's been walking with this guilt that she missed something. And her husband was actually roommates with Reverend Clemente Pickney, who was one of the Emmanuel 9. And so it had all these, and that's what I mean, we're under the same sentence. We're in the same community, right? Like, I'm saying these things about Dylan. I'm not saying them in a vacuum. I'm saying them in the same spaces that the people who tried to raise him right are in, right? Who are walking around with this brokenness and this hurt, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm under the same sentence. I can't say, well, I'm one of the progressive Christians. I'm one of the queer affirming ones. I'm one of the non-racist ones. If you're a Christian, then you've inherited all the good stuff from the gospel that we love, the liberation, the love, the freedom, the grace, the fact that we get to be who we are, the fact that God wants us to have incredibly rich lives, whether that be our social lives, spiritual lives, sexual lives, whatever, all those groovy, wonderful things we love about Jesus, the transformative power of Christ, right? You get to keep all that, but you don't get to get rid of all the shit. defending slavery, the oppression of women for thousands of years, the oppression of queer folks, the oppression of our Jewish siblings. I mean, you don't get to just say, I don't want any parts of that. And that's one of my big concerns with the progressive Christian movement, is that we want to pretend like, well, we're not them. No, we're them. And I think I think a proper spiritual response is, we are them. We've realized what we've done. Help us be better.
Yes. Yes. Could you talk us through why what your perspective is on police? Because I can see someone just getting a hot button moment and reading that the police force, police just need to be eradicated and stopped and dismantled. And I think that scares a lot of people, alienates people, which whatever. But I just want to hear from your perspective why the system is so oppressive and demonic, as you say.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Yeah, when we talk about the abolition of police, and the abolition of policing systems in America, you have to understand the history of it. The first sheriff departments were started to catch runaway slaves, and after that, it was to enforce the black codes in the antebellum South. I mean, law enforcement in this country was founded on a racist premise, right? And now you expect it to be different, when we've literally done no work on that in 200 years, 400 years from my people's perspective. So that's the first thing. If you don't understand the history of law enforcement, that's one thing. The other thing is, again, if you're using the praxis I gave you around liberation theology, that you're fighting for your oppressor's freedom as well as your own, these guys are under the same system. They're being trained, taught, encouraged, and raised to be these violent jackboots for what's going on right now, right? Like, those guys are suffering under the same PTSD I am, because I grew up in a neighborhood where there were constant gunshots. The crack epidemic was allowed to run wild. There was no economic investment. We didn't even have grocery stores around us. And so, of course, everything's collapsing in on itself. Of course, crime is rampant. I'm suffering from PTSD from growing up there. And then they send these guys from the suburbs to work there 12 hours a day. You think they don't have PTSD? They are victims of the same white supremacist system as we are. And the problem is that a lot of police officers are willing victims. They are willing participants. They realize they're getting screwed. They realize they're not making the community better. They realize they're not changing anything. They realize that they're not making anything improved at all, that they're going to run into the same crimes from the same people every day, and it's just going to be a pattern that repeats itself, and they're willing to do it, and they're willing to brutalize people in that system. Those are the people who are within law enforcement. Everyone talks about the good cops. Where are they when these happen? Why has not one officer come forward in any of these cases? Where's the officer from Trayvon's case who could talk about the evidence and the things that were changed during that? Where are the officers around Mike Brown? Are you going to tell me that every one of these instances, the police were completely innocent, even the ones where you watched black people be shot in the back from 20 feet away, 40 feet away, 50 feet away? Why is it always citizens that turn in this footage? Why is it never their compatriots? So listen, I understand there's guys who don't do that stuff on the force, but when they turn a blind eye to the guys who do because of some code of honor or loyalty, no, they're meant to be loyal to the community. And this is why the policing system has to be abolished. We have to come up with a better, more equitable way to do restorative justice in our communities. And we have to have this conversation now. Policing is broken in this system. The prison industrial complex, we've all agreed, is broken since the work of Michelle Alexander and, the movie 13th and, the new Jim Crow. Even, you look at that movie, you got Newt Gingrich sitting down with Angela Davis agreeing that the prison industrial complex is evil and needs to be abolished. Policing is a part of that.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for those guys who are on the front lines who are getting their ass kicked for their jerk off coworker, right? But I also know that they're not turning him in.
Yeah.
Right.
I've never thought of it that way, honestly. But the standing beside that murderer and watching him murder George Floyd, that makes me sick. And it's really, really hard. I'm a Christian woman. I'm talking to you as a Christian man. Like, where do we find the line between anger, grace, compassion? Like, how do we have all of these elements of Jesus Christ within us in the midst of what just happened to your brother?
I think it's a shame that the Christian tradition has divorced itself so much from its Jewish siblings and roots. Yeah, I think one of the most interesting conversations that's happening right now on Twitter is there's a group of rabbis who are asking, what's wrong with God? Is God broken? They don't think God is broken. They're rabbis, clearly, but they're asking the theological, is God broken? Is this why this is happening? Right? What's wrong? Is God sick? They're like asking these deep questions. And I think it's because they're more in touch with the prophetic tradition from Scripture. I mean, Habakkuk is clearly a book that a lot of people don't read, but this person takes the Almighty to task and demands an answer. Mm. Many of the minor prophets demand answers. I don't think that our anger is necessarily a bad thing. I think holy, righteous anger can be a good thing. I actually think it could be fuel to change the world. I think it's the same anger that fueled Jesus's ministry when he walked around Nazareth in Galilee and he saw people suffering under an oppressive system. And that's what moved Jesus. Jesus saw suffering and then he moved. So, I mean, I just think that's a good praxis for us going forward, or a good way to kind of think around some of that stuff.
I've thought too about the language that we use, darkness to light, black and white, what's bad, what's good. There's obviously been studies where like little kids will identify a black doll as bad. Is there a call or a way to change the language in which we use in our ministry, in our church?
Yeah, I mean, I try and do a lot of that stuff. This Advent, I messed with the idea of the hours in the dawn. I talked about the morning light. I talked about the dawn light. I talked about the deep, rich hues and colorful hues of the morning dawn. To get around that darkness and light imagery. I don't wear white robes. I don't wear white stoles. I never use white to represent baptism, Christ, or Easter, or any of those things. If anything, I'll use a rainbow. I don't, I don't use that language. I don't use he, him, his language for God. I never gender God in any of my sermons. I've never gendered God. That's stupid. Why are you gendering the Almighty? I mean, even that kind of stuff. I mean, just really, really being willing to examine your language and being willing to be wrong. The greatest things that ever happened to me in my life were because I was wrong. Like, I thought I knew what God was about, and I was wrong. I thought I knew what the church was about, and I was wrong. I thought I knew which direction my life was headed, and I was wrong. So the willingness to be wrong, re-examine your hymnals, the worship you're using, the language that you're using, and being really willing to, like, I would almost say queer it up, because queer theology has been playing with language for a really long time. And learn the history of the stuff you're singing. Learn the history of this, where things come from. But that light to darkness binary and binaries in general have always been dangerous territory for the Church Catholic over 2,000 years.
Yeah. Rev Lenny, you can totally say no to this. I'm just wondering if there would be any desire or wanting to like lead us or send us off in prayer.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think
I would love to pray.
Yeah, I think it'd be absolutely beautiful to have you do that, because I know people just need like hope, and we need love to get set forth in power in this movement. I would be honored to hear a prayer with you.
Of course. God is with you. Loving and gracious and liberating God, we come to you at a time where we just don't know what to do. It seems like The whole world's crashing around us. We've been compassionately social distancing in the name of Jesus for so long, we're starting to go stir crazy, and it feels like another revolutionary summer is happening in America. Christ, we know you're in the center of that. We know you are moving amongst all of the uprisings and the peoples and the cries of those who are suffering in America. And we call upon your power. We call upon your name. And we ask you to empower us to get off our asses and on the streets. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One last question I have for you, just so we don't get it twisted. What is the role of a white girl like me in this moment?
I would say, you have a pretty big platform. One of my friends, her name is Tori Glass. I don't know if you know her. She does white homework.
Okay.
Go to toriglass.com or white homework. And what that does is it gives you curriculum to study white supremacy and the history of systemic racism in your community. So whether you live in the middle of a field in Iowa or you live in LA, you can use this curriculum and it can guide you. And once you realize what's happening in your area and the history of your area, what's happening currently in your area, you'll be better set to come in solidarity as accomplices in this revolution for your Black and brown siblings.
Thank you. And where can everybody find you online?
Yeah, I'm Lenny A. Duncan on all the things. You can also go to lennyduncan.com. I have a Substack that's not officially launched, which is United States of Grace, and unitedstatesofgrace.com will be launching as soon as I get the pre-orders up for the second book. And you can find any of my stuff on Amazon, which you shouldn't buy from, IndieBound, IndieBound. You can, if you look up Reverend Lenny Duncan or Lenny Duncan, church, it'll probably come up.
Yeah, and I'm being so edified and educated by Dear Church. A love letter from a Black preacher to the whitest denomination in the U.S. Please, everybody go pick it up. I found it for $9.99 ebook version. So easy to listen to. And that's it. We love you all so much. God bless.